Yo, what's going on everybody, this is Rockin here and welcome back to a brand new video. Today I'm going to be going over some basic After Effects techniques, tricks, how to use the program, what different settings do, effects to use, just going through basically all the basics of using the software, as I've had a lot of requests from people who have been wondering or who are new to After Effects and literally have no idea what they're doing. I make a lot of After Effects tutorials all revolving around Valorant, montages and edits, so make sure you check them out if you're interested. And yeah, let's get right into it. Before we get started, I'm just going to put some timestamps on the screen right now as well as in the description for the different sections of the video so you can navigate and find the bits that you're interested in. Yeah, let's get right into it. So when you open up After Effects, you'll be dumped onto a screen like this, and basically what you're going to want to do is come up to the top, hit File, Save As, and Save As, and this is going to allow you to create a project and have it saved so that, you know, if it crashes you can always go back and things like that. So I'm just going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it After Effects Basics, and go in there and call the project tutorial and hit save. So now I'm saved, I've got my project, it will appear in my documents and we're all good to go. Now before we do anything, there's some essential things that we need to change to begin with before we start doing anything. These settings will just have to change once and they'll be saved until you next update. You know, they might change when you update. So basically what you got to do is make sure you go to File, Project Settings, and then make sure that you have video rendering and effects set to Mercury GPU acceleration. If you don't have an NVIDIA graphics card, or you're running on integrated graphics, or you have an AMD card or something like that, you might not have this option available to you, in which case, you know, you'll just have to go with Mercury software, which means that it's just going to dump all its encoding onto your CPU, whereas at least with the GPU acceleration it can, you know, relieve some of that and just makes playback a bit faster and things like that. If you can't, it's not too big of a deal, but if you do have an NVIDIA GPU, make sure that you're definitely utilizing it, as you may as well make use of it. And now you're going to want to come up to Edit and come down to Preferences, and then select where it says Media and Disk Cache. And now what you want to do is allocate as much disk space as you possibly can. So in my case, I've chosen 100 gigabytes. If you can do 50, if you can do 20, physically as much as you possibly can to allocate here. If you have an SSD in your computer, I can't stress this enough, make sure you have your cache folder set on your SSD. Obviously, if you only have a 60 or 120 gig SSD, you're not gonna be able to allocate much space on it, in which case, you know, fair enough, put it on your hard drive. But if you have an SSD and you can stretch and allocate After Effects cache to your SSD, please do it. It's going to improve your preview times, import times, render time, literally everything. It makes it so much better than having it on a hard drive. I have mine on my C drive in my temp folder. To change where this is, just go to choose folder and then you can find wherever you want to put it. Doesn't really matter where it goes, just make sure it's on the drive that you want it to be on. So for me, that's my SSD. It might be on your SSD by default. If you need to put it on your hard drive because you don't have enough space, then fair enough, put it on there. But please try and put it on your SSD, even if that means, you know, moving a game or two across. Just make sure that you have it on your SSD if you possibly can. And then when you're done creating each edit, once you've rendered it, come back and just hit empty disk cache, and it's just going to say, do you want to clear it? I cleared mine only about 10 minutes ago, so I've only got 500 megabytes in here, although I would usually have, you know, up close to 100 gigs, 70, 80, 90 gigs when I'm done editing. And then come down to Conform Media Cache, make sure these are on the same drive as your disk cache. You don't put them in the same folder, but just make sure that they're on the same drive. And then also when you're done with your edits and you've rendered them, you can come back here and clean database and cache as well, and that's just going to free up the space that it's already that it's used whilst caching. Next up, come down to autosave and tick save every, and I have mine at 5 minutes. You can put yours at 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. After Effects does tend to crash sometimes, so I put mine at 5 minutes because, you know, I can do a lot of work quite quickly, and if I lose out on 10, 15 minutes work, it's just a real pain in the ass to try and redo. So I just make sure I have that on save, and every 5 minutes. It does get a little bit annoying, you know, popping up every 5 minutes saving, but it saved me so many times, so I'm glad I've got that checked. And also tick save and render queue starts. Maximum project versions, I have mine at 5, you know, that means that I'm going to have 25 minutes worth of autosaves. You know, if you need more than that, you want to go back several hours, then, you know, you can increase that. I just have mine at 5 and it's good. I have mine next to the project, so that means that if I show you, you can see here, this is where I have one of my other project files saved. And then next to it, it's in the same folder, it's going to create another folder called Adobe After Effects Autosave, and in there you'll have all of your saves, which is very useful. If you don't want them to be in the same place, you can just hit custom location and send them all to one specific place if you want to have all your backups there. I just leave mine in the same project because then when I'm done with it, I'll copy and paste it onto my cloud server or something like that. just so I can keep them all together. So I use next to project. And then next up is memory. This is going to be how much RAM you can allocate to After Effects or Adobe applications in general. So I have 16 gigs of RAM in my computer. 16 is, I would say, the minimum for editing. Ideally have more than that. I will be upgrading to 32 in the future. So ideally you have at least 16. You know, you might get away with 8, but it's going to be pretty sluggish. And then you're going to want to make this RAM reserve for other applications as low as physically possible. So normally when I'm editing, I'll just have a web browser, maybe Spotify, maybe Discord, something like that. So I'm leaving 3 gigs reserved for other applications. Make this as low as you possibly can. You know, if you don't have anything open, you could just leave it at 1 gig. I believe 3 is the minimum. Yeah, 3 is the minimum it will let me do. Obviously, if you have 8 gigs, it might let you go down to 1. But for me, the minimum is 3. I can't go any lower than that. And that means it's going to leave me with 13 gigabytes free for After Effects to use. And trust me, when I'm midway through an edit and I look at my task manager, it is using 90% of my RAM. It'll use all 13 if it can, and it's really worth allocating as much as you possibly can. It allows you to have more of the preview pre-rendered as well, so you could pretty much watch back an entire video before you render it to look for errors rather than have to preview segments at a time if you only have a small amount of RAM allocated. Here where it says reduce cache size on the system as lower memory, I actually don't have this ticked. I don't know if it will make a difference or not. If you have 8 gigs or any less, I mean, obviously if you have less than 8 gigs, I mean, I don't even know why you're trying to edit, to be completely honest with you. You could tick it. I'm not sure how big of a difference it makes. I've never used it. But yeah, and that's pretty much all for these settings. Oh, quickly, one more thing that I would recommend you do is when it comes to audio hardware, make sure that you actually have the audio device that you use, because it doesn't necessarily always use the Windows default. So make sure that you have that checked. Otherwise, when you're previewing back, you might not be able to hear your audio. I've had that happen to a couple of people before, which I've been told about, and it's going to be a pain in the ass to fix, and it's super simple. So just make sure you have this set from the beginning, as well as audio output mapping. You can just make sure that you have these set to 1 and 2. I mean, if you want to lay your headset backwards for whatever reason, you can swap these around, or, you know, if your cable's messed up or something like that. But yeah, just make sure that your audio settings are set properly. And then down to scripting and expressions. If you watch some of my previous tutorials, we use some scripts, so you're going to want to make sure you have allow scripts to write files and access network checked. If you don't plan on using any scripts, you don't need to check that, but you know, I always do just in case I plan on running anything, you know, just to make sure that it's going to work. And I'm going to hit OK. So your After Effects, when you first open it, might look something like this, where you've got these different menus over the side over here. You've got your tools up here, projects over here, and your timeline down here. I switch over to standard, which makes the timeline a little bit smaller. It adds a render queue here, allows you to have these effect controls up here as well. And it changes the left side so that you can just have the windows that you like. So for me, yours may not look like this to begin with. Just make sure that you tick the ones that I have ticked. Obviously you don't have to, you can have whatever you like here. I normally have tracker on, which is down here. You know, I can just access it just by doing this. But I like to have it there ready for me to use, because I do a lot of tracking when it comes to montages and edits and things for my cinematics and stuff like that. And just make sure that you have all the important ones ticked, just like I do. I just have all the ones that I use on a regular basis available to me, so I don't have to try and find them every time, and it just makes my workflow and my life a lot easier. So for the layout of After Effects, at the top you have your different tools. On this left side you have what's called your project bin, which is going to be where you drag your clips into and where you can see what's in your project, your compositions, your clips, your images, your music, things like that. And then here is going to be the main preview window, which is where your main video preview would be if we had one in here. And then over the right side you have different menus like your info, audio settings, preview, which is going to control, you know, playing and pausing your preview, changing the frame rate of it, turning audio on and off, things like that. Down here you have your effects and presets, which is going to be one of the menus that you're going to need the most. That's going to be where you're going to search for your effects, search for apply presets and things that you may have downloaded from other people's packs and things like that. So that's all very important to know. And then at the bottom is where your timeline is. So that's going to be where you drag your clips, where you cut them, where you move them, where you change what order they're in, where you add music, where you do all sorts of stuff like that. Now I'm just going to import a video by dragging and dropping it from Windows Explorer into After Effects, and then to remove it you can always just hit delete. If you don't want to import how I just did, you can right click, go to import, and then file, and find it on your drive wherever you have it saved. For me, I just prefer to drag and drop it in every time. If you are doing something like a PNG sequence, for example, if you've rendered something out of Cinema 4D, Blender, something like that, you're going to probably have it as a PNG sequence. So you're going to want to import it using the import feature over here rather than drag and dropping. So for example, if I go to File, you can see here I have a PNG sequence of over 650 images. So all I do is tick the first one, make sure PNG sequence is enabled, and I hit import, and there you go. That's now basically a video rather than importing 650 individual single images. That's just an easy way to do that if you need to do that. And what you'll notice is the frame rate is set to 30. I actually created this at 60. So in order to change that to 60, so it's not playing back at half speed, you right click on it, go to interpret footage, main, and then here where it says assume this frame rate, you change 30 to 60 or whatever frame rate you want to use. And it works the same for videos as well. So if I recorded this at say 120 frames and I wanted to play it back at 60, I could right click, hit interpret footage, main, and then change the frame rate. Now to edit clips, you're going to want to create a composition. You can do that by clicking here or this button down here, and then once you do that, it's going to open up this window, and you're going to want to match the resolution to the clip that you're using, as well as the frame rate and the duration. Just make it the same length as the clip you're using or longer. That just makes it a lot easier. Ideally, you make it longer. You can always shorten it down later on if you want to. So I'm just going to leave mine at 1 minute and hit OK. Alternatively, if you don't want to do that, Control Z to undo. Anything you do in here, press Control Z to undo. Like I just created that composition, Control Z to undo, Control Shift Z to redo. So you can see it's now appeared back again. And just remember that for anything you make, Control Z to undo, Control Shift Z to redo. So I'm just going to undo that again so it's gone. Alternatively, if you want to just create a composition with the settings of your clip already, you can just drag it down to where this little box here is, which is the new composition, and drop it on there, and it will create a composition already with the settings of your clip. I like to do it this way just because I have more control, so I'll call it composition and hit OK. It gives me more control. That way I can change the resolution and things like that rather than just dragging and dropping onto here, but it's slightly more complicated. So if you're new to it, then just stick with that. Now to add it to my composition, I'm just going to drag and drop it onto my timeline, and as you can see, it's now here. It can be previewed. On the left side down here, you'll see this eye, which if you may be familiar with this from Photoshop. If you click it, you see it disappears, so that's now made it hidden. If I click it again, it's now appeared, and the thing next to it turns the audio for the clip on or off. So if you have a clip with some audio that you don't want in the actual video, you can just turn it off simply like that rather than having to lower the volume of it. At the bottom of the preview window, you'll see this, which is the preview resolution. Full is obviously going to play back at the resolution of the composition. Half is going to be half of that. Third, obviously a third. Quarter, it's going to be a quarter of it. So if you're having issues playing back, it's lagging, or you can't preview too much because you're running out of RAM and things like that, just drop this down to quarter. I tend to edit pretty much all of my montages and edits on either third or quarter just because it's a lot smoother, and I really don't need to see that much detail when I'm editing initially. Obviously, if it's something which is quite particular, I can always bump it up to full just temporarily and then drop it back down later on. In this corner, you're going to see the scale of it. This isn't going to change the scale of the actual clip when you render it, but it just changes the scale in the preview. So if I wanted to zoom in 400 times, you can now see that it's zoomed right into the middle. If I go to 1.5 times, it's now really small, obviously 100, and then you can go to fit. That's just going to fit it to the box so you can see as much as possible without any going off screen. To zoom in and out, you can use the scroll wheel like this to zoom in, and to move around, if you hold the scroll wheel and then move your mouse, you can see it, you can pan around. So if I was to zoom in, I could then pan over to see things, in my HUD for example, and then I can just go back to fit and it's going to put it back to its normal size. Down here, this is the exposure or the brightness. This just changes it for the preview. This won't affect your render in any way. So if you need to, you're masking something out, or you need to see something a bit clearer, you can just drag this up and it's just going to change the brightness. It will not be rendered like that, don't worry, and you can always chuck it back to 0 if you need to. And that's pretty much it for the preview. In order to edit clips, you can use this. It's called the current time indicator, and by dragging it along the clip, you'll be able to see what's at that time. So for example, at 22 seconds, if I click here, at 22 seconds in my clip, I'm looking at my buy menu. In order to split the clip, you can press Control Shift D, and that's going to split the clip. And then if you want to delete part of it, so for example, if I wanted to delete this bit, I can press delete. Then to bring the clip to the beginning of the composition, so I don't have a 22-second black screen at the beginning of my video, I'm just going to drag it to the beginning of the composition. Alternatively, what you can do is drag this blue indicator here, which shows the work area. You can drag that up if you want to. I tend not to do that. I always make sure that I have the clips lined up with the beginning, and then when I get to the end of my edit, if I have any excess left over, I will drag the end one down, and that means I don't have to constantly be adjusting or extending the length of my composition. If, for example, your edit does fill the composition and you need to make it bigger, you can't just drag this out. What you need to do is come up here to where it says the composition name that you're using, right click, composition settings, and you can change the time. So for example, I can change this from 1 minute to 2 minutes, and now you can see if I zoom out using this little bar down here, it's now twice the length. To zoom in and out, you can use this down here, just click or drag this bar, or this blue one up here, you can drag like this, and that will also do the same thing. Or if you press plus or minus on your keyboard, it does the exact same thing as well. A big part of After Effects editing is keyframes. Now what keyframes are is it tells After Effects what's going to happen at this specific frame in your video. So for example, if I press this down arrow over here and then go into transform, it's going to give me all the options for this clip that I have available to me. So that's the anchor point, the position, the scale, the rotation, and the opacity. The anchor point is going to tell me where the center of the video is essentially. If I rotate, it's going to rotate around the anchor point. So if I move the anchor point somewhere else in the video, so in the corner for example, and then I go to rotate it, it's going to rotate around the corner rather than the center. So I tend to always keep the anchor point to the middle. If you need to move the anchor point, come up to the top, click this thing here, which is the pan behind tool, and then this middle part is the anchor point, and you can drag it around to wherever you want it to be. I'm just going to leave mine in the center. I don't need to move it. I've never have done, and I don't think I ever will need to. Next up is the position, which is going to say whereabouts the clip is in your composition on screen. So if you drag here, this is going to adjust the y-axis, and then Control Z to undo. And this is going to drag the x-axis. Alternatively, you can just click and drag it in the viewport. I don't tend to do this because when I try and put it back, it might not line up properly, and I'll end up with a little black line at the top or at the bottom or at the sides. So I tend to just use this and adjust it specifically how I want it to be. Next up is the scale. So by adjusting the scale, obviously that's going to zoom in and out. Next to it, you may notice this little link icon, which is constraining the proportions. So what that means is if I uncheck it and I scale, it's going to scale vertically, and here it's going to scale horizontally. Whereas if I tick it, it's always going to maintain its aspect ratio and stay exactly the same as it was and be preserved, which is how I recommend you have it. Rotation obviously changes how it's going to rotate, whether that's clockwise, anti-clockwise, by how many degrees, and you just control that by dragging this little degree symbol right here. If you drag this, you're not going to notice anything's changed, because that's actually saying how many times it's rotated 360 degrees, which doesn't matter for beginners and things like that. That's only if you want to rotate more than 360 degrees over a long period of time. So if you wanted to do 3 rotations, you could keyframe it at 0 and then keyframe it at 3 a few seconds later, but we'll leave that for now at 0. And just worry about rotating it by using this. The final option here is the opacity. That's going to be how transparent it is. So 100 is completely in view. You can't see through it. It's solid. And if you drag it down, you start to see through it. The reason it's going black is because the background of our composition is black. So if we go to the composition settings, you can see the background color here is set to black. If I change this to red and hit OK, now when we adjust the opacity, you're going to start to see the red background. If I was to have a clip behind it, it would start revealing the clip behind it. Effectively what the opacity does is just changes how see-through this layer is going to be. And then next up we have audio, which will be the only option you'll have if it's a music file, or if it's a sound file like an MP3 or a WAV, which you drag and drop in exactly the same as you do with a video, drag and drop it on your timeline exactly the same, just you'll only have the audio option. It provides you with audio levels, so you can adjust how loud or how quiet it is by changing how many decibels you want to add or take away from the original amount. And then if you hit one more down arrow, you'll be able to see the waveform of what the audio looks like. So if you're syncing to a song or something, you may have a spike every time there's a beat, and it just makes it a little bit easier to sync to. One more thing which is quite important for editing is markers. You can add markers by clicking this over here and dragging it to where you want it to be, and that's going to be a marker like that. So for example, if I want to have it to the point, if I come to the end of my clip and I know I shoot on this frame right here, I can then put this marker on there, so I always know that at that exact frame, so long as I don't move the video, that's going to be where I kill him. And then to remove the marker, you can right click on it and hit delete this marker. I don't tend to use markers like this on the actual composition itself. I put them on the clips, and in order to do that, you press the star key or asterisk on your keyboard, and that's going to add a marker, and you can see that's actually added it to the clip itself. So regardless of where I move the clip, this marker is always going to be where I killed the guy. Or whatever frame you set that to. So now I'm going to explain what keyframes are. So for example, if we go to the end where I kill this guy, if I want it to zoom in once he dies, so to add like a scale effect to the kill, I can zoom in to where that is, and so long as I have this open, I can go to the scale and I can adjust it just like I did before. And what that's going to do is have it scale throughout the entire clip. Now let's say I only want one section of this clip to be scaled, so that's just after I kill him. I can tick this little stopwatch button, and what that's going to do is tell me that at this frame I want it to be set how I set it over here. So I've just set a keyframe for scale, and it's added this little diamond. So at this point in the video, I want to make sure that my video is scaled to say 130. As this is the only keyframe in the clip, you'll see that the rest of it is still scaled to 130. However, if I go back one frame, which you can navigate frame by frame by holding Control and using the left and right arrows. If I go back one frame and then change the scale back to 100, you'll see that before this keyframe, everything is 100. And then as soon as you get to the other keyframe, everything is now 130. You see it's now scaled a lot more. In order to animate something like that, so let's say it's normal, I get the kill, it zooms in, and then I go forward say 10-20 frames like that, and now I want it to go back to normal. I can then type in 100 and it will automatically keyframe it. If it doesn't, you can just click this little diamond, but it should automatically keyframe it if you're making an adjustment. And as you can see now, as I come in, it stays at 100 until I hit the 130 keyframe, bang, goes into 130, and then it slowly, until it reaches that other keyframe, it slowly comes back in. These keyframes work exactly the same for every effect on here. So for example, if I wanted to do the rotation as well, I'd keyframe it here at 0, go to the end, keyframe it at 0 by pressing the little diamond. And if I wanted it to rotate, say 8 degrees or something like that, you can see the clip's normal rotation, normal scale. As soon as it hits the 130 and 8 degree rotation, it's rotated. And then as you continue going, it's going to rotate back to normal and back to the normal scale as well. You can use this on opacity, position, everything, even the audio levels. It works exactly the same, and that's the basics of keyframes. If you want to make them smoother, so they animate a bit smoother, so they speed up, slow down, and then speed up, it just makes the effect look a bit smoother. You can select all the keyframes in one row and press F9 on your keyboard, and that's going to ease them so that it now, as it scales down, it's going to scale fast. It's then going to slow down, and then it's going to scale fast again towards the end, which just makes it seem a little bit smoother. So I recommend you doing that if you feel like it. And then if you're really advanced, you can then go into the graph editor, which is going to be quite confusing for beginners, and you can change exactly how quickly that speeds up and slows down in here. And if you want me to go over the graph editor, I can do that in a separate video, but for the sake of this one, I just want to keep it as basic as I possibly can. Next up is some basic effects. I'm just going to be showing you some stock effects that you get with After Effects. You can install plugins, which are basically other little bits of software which bolt onto After Effects and give you extra features. Whether that's something like Magic Bullet Looks, which will give you color correction filters and things like that, or whether it's something like Red Giant Sapphire, which will give you shakes and things like that. They're all types of plugins, and they just add extra features that After Effects doesn't have by default. So if you want to apply an adjustment to a clip, it's much the same as it would be in Photoshop. I'm going to come over to Effects and Presets. So let's say I want to make this a different color. I'm going to come over here to Effects and Presets. I'm going to search Hue. I'm going to search hue, and you'll see hue/saturation, and I can drag and drop that onto my clip, and it's now given me these extra options. If you don't see these, yours probably looks like this, in which case you're just going to click Effects Controls and it's going to bring it up. Alternatively, down here you can hit the down arrow here if it's not already open, go to Effects, Hue and Saturation, and you have the same options here. You just don't have as much of a visual representation as you do up here, so I tend to always make my adjustments up here. Now I can change the hue just by rotating this, which is just going to change the hue of the colors that are already there. If I want to change every color to the same color, I can tick where it says Colorize, and that's going to make every color on the screen one singular color, compared to, you see with the hue, the box stays a different color to everything else, like this for example. The different colors will stay different colors, but you're just changing what those different colors are. Whereas if you tick Colorize, every color is going to be the same. And then you can come down here to where it says Color Hue and drag this, and it's going to cycle through the colors. And if you want to change the saturation, drag up the color saturation, change the lightness, or make it darker. Just simple things like that can be done with the default effects and presets built into After Effects. Another one could be brightness and contrast. So if I search bright, you see brightness and contrast, I can drag that on. And that's then going to allow me to increase the brightness, increase the contrast, so you can create an effect like that. If you don't want to use brightness and contrast, another one which is quite similar to Photoshop again is called curves, which if I drag that on, then gives me this curve where I can adjust each color individually, or I can just adjust them all, which is what I'm going to do. So if I make the shadows slightly darker and I make the highlights slightly brighter, you can see it's achieved basically the same effect as the other one did. Curves are really simple, pretty much just drag them around so that you get to the point that you want until you get to a point that you're happy with. I tend to just use this sort of S shape where I'll drag this one in this corner up slightly and drag this one in this corner down slightly, as you saw. If you want to install any presets, for example, you've downloaded a transitions pack from YouTube, or you've got a preset that your friend's made and wants to send to you, to install those, what you want to do is navigate to where After Effects is installed. So for me, that's Local Disk C, Program Files Adobe, After Effects CC 2019, Support Files, and then I'm going to find where it says presets, double click on here. I'm going to create a new folder, give it administrator privileges, and I'm going to call it, you know, presets or friends presets or whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to call my tutorial presets, and I need to go into that folder and drag and drop your presets in. Once you've dropped them in, they should then appear over here under effects and presets. You can go to animation presets, user presets are going to be ones that you created yourself, and then under the other presets folder is going to be all the ones that you've imported. So if I go down here, you'll see all of my presets. You won't see the tutorial presets because you have to refresh by clicking here, refresh list, and then that will make, and then once you drag and drop them in, they should then appear here. Mine haven't because I don't actually have presets in that folder, so After Effects doesn't really know what to do with it. But if I go in, I can see, you know, transform, I've got this. If I go into Twitch as a plugin that I have, I've got some presets for that as well. I've got other, you know, if I go into, for example, camera shake presets, you can see I've got all of these, and pretty much all it's going to do is when you drag and drop it onto your clip, it's just going to apply an animation preset that someone else has created, or, you know, you may create it yourself, so you don't have to do the same thing every time. So if I go into user presets, I have this gunshot hard is a preset that I made, which basically I drag onto my clip every time I get a kill. So if I drag this onto my clip like this, you'll see it's now added these keyframes down here. If I go into these effects, you can see, if I go into S-Shake, you can see here are some keyframes it's added for me, which is S-Shake is a plugin. Optics compensation does come with After Effects as standard. You can see it's added some keyframes in for that as well. So what that's going to do, if I play through, it's just going to do this sort of zoom in effect, pop out, and then shake, and that's a preset. If I then remove the preset, Control Z to undo, you can see the clip is just back to normal, and that's how you use presets. The best way to improve and get better at using After Effects is just to mess around with all the stock presets that there are, drag and drop them on your clips, mess around with them, figure out how they work, you know, add some keyframes, animate them, just mess around with them until you get the gist of how they work, as I obviously can't go through every single effect in here. If you see one and you're not sure how it works and you know, don't want to try it out or whatever, I'm sure there's a tutorial online you can find of how to use it somewhere, as well as any plugins that you want to get. I'm sure you can find several tutorials on how to use specific plugins that you're interested as well. And then one final thing, which I think every beginner should know, is something called a precomposition. So what a precomposition is, a composition which you can put inside of other compositions. I know it sounds confusing, but it's sort of like a smart object in Photoshop. So for example, if I was to take this clip and I was to duplicate it by pressing Control D, and then if I was to Control Shift D to delete and a bit of excess there, and then I delete a little bit here, and then let's say that I scaled this inwards like this, just as a, you know, simple example, and then I was to right click on this and hit pre-compose, this is now going to make a pre-composition. So I can call this pre-comp. Leave all attributes in composition basically means that any effects that you've applied to it and things like that will remain on the composition rather than on the video clip itself. Or if you hit move all attributes to new composition, it's just going to create a pre-composition without any effects on it, and then the clip inside of that composition is going to have the effects that you applied to it originally. So for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to leave it on leave all attributes in composition. Pretty much, if you're trying to pull off a certain effect, try one. If it doesn't work, try the other one and it'll probably work. So I'm just going to hit OK. And basically you can see the color of this has now changed. The length is still exactly the same. It's still exactly the same clip. Although if I now double click on it, you can see it now opens up its own complete separate window. I've got the full minute worth of video here. It's not cut, it's not split, it's got nothing's happened to it. The color's the same because the preset or the effect that I added, which is the hue and saturation, is applied to this composition and not onto the video inside it specifically. So anything that goes into this composition is then going to have these effects applied to it. So if I come to, you know, this section, go into it, so you can see my marker's still in the same place as it would be in the main comp. If I was to add a solid and scale it in, something like that, and just place it on the screen like this, you'll see if I go back to the other one, it's now appeared in here. So anything that I do inside of this composition, you know, I could rotate it. Anything that I do inside of this composition is going to update on the main one. So if I wanted to change the clip in here, or if I wanted to delete the clip, I can go back in. You see, it's gone. Anything that I do inside of this composition is going to update on here as if it was just one singular video clip, and this means that you don't have to then have hundreds upon hundreds of clips layered on top of each other. And it also allows you to just apply an effect to a certain composition to try it out, and then later on if you want to change what's inside of it, you can always do that. And finally, what you're going to want to do when you're done with your edit is render it. In order to render it, make sure that you have over here the composition selected that you want to render. So if I wanted to render my pre-composition, which is going to be this one, which obviously I don't want to render, I'm not going to select that. I'm going to select the main composition, which is the one that I've been working in here. To make sure you have that selected. Then come up to where it says composition, add to render queue. I use media encoder. If you don't have media encoder, don't worry about it. I'm not going to go through that now, but effectively it's the same as the normal After Effects renderer, except you can queue multiple files and then just hit play and it will render them all one after each other, you know, if you're going to leave your PC overnight to render or something like that. But in our case, we're just going to be rendering one video, so I'm just going to hit add to render queue. And as you can see, nothing's changed. It's just changed over here to where it says render queue, and now we can configure our settings. So I can click where it says best settings. It's going to open this little window, so you can change the quality, change the resolution. So you can change the quality, change the resolution. Don't touch the disk cache, don't touch proxies, effects, solo switches, guide layers, color depth. Just leave this all as it is. Frame blending, you can leave on for checked layers. I can make another tutorial on frame blending if that's something people are interested in. I just want to try and keep this one as basic as possible. You can change the frame rate of your edit. You can add motion blur, all sorts of things like that. So I'm just going to leave that as it is. Then output module is going to be what format you're rendering it in. So if I want to render it out as a PNG sequence, or I want to render it as a QuickTime video, or I want to render it as AVI or whatever, I'm going to choose the option in here, and then I can resize it if I want to, or crop it. I recommend not touching any of this. If I'm going to resize it, I'm going to change the resolution in there, or just have my composition set to that size to begin with. So I leave that. Color management, I wouldn't recommend touching anything either. And then over here where it says output to, you just click and you can save it, you know, to wherever you want. So I'm going to call mine whatever, composition.avi. I can just hit save, and then when I come over here and hit render, it's going to render the video out and it will appear in the folder where I specified right here. So that's pretty much it for this video, showing you the absolute basics of After Effects. If you want any more advanced tutorials, make sure you check out my other ones. I have several on my channel. They all revolve around making edits and montages, like gaming montages, specifically in the game of Valorant, although I'm sure you can use those tutorials to edit Fortnite, CSGO, Rainbow, whatever game you're playing. And yeah, just try to have fun. Just try to have fun with After Effects. Don't get too overwhelmed, you know. Once you get the hang of it, it's super duper easy. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, please slap a like on it and subscribe, as well as check out any of my montages and edits. They'll be linked at the end of this video. If you're interested for some inspiration on what can be made and things like that for your next edits. And other than that, thanks for clicking on this video, thanks for checking it out. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.